My sister forbade me from going on the trip I paid for the family, so I canceled her ticket and we went on vacation without her. I am 29 years old and come from a relatively close-knit family. We are 3 siblings: me, my younger brother, 26 years old, and my younger sister, Bonnie, 24. I have a good relationship with my brother, but I've always had a somewhat complicated relationship with Bonnie. It's not that we don't get along, but she has always been a bit demanding. When we were children, our parents tended to favor her because she was the youngest. Although I've tried to let it go, there have been occasions when her behavior has really tested my patience. My parents spoiled her a lot. This wasn't much of an issue when we were younger because I could simply ignore her most of the time. However, as we grew up and she began to demand more, things started to change. This year, I received a good bonus at work. My parents' anniversary was approaching, and I thought it would be a great idea to take the family on vacation. It had been years since we had gone anywhere together, so I believed it would be a fantastic way to reconnect and celebrate my parents' anniversary. I planned a 1-week trip to Hawaii, covering all the expenses, flights, accommodations, activities, everything. When I announced the trip to my parents, they were delighted. I knew they'd be excited, especially for the location. I was sure my brother would also appreciate the gesture. However, I was worried about Bonnie's reaction, as her mood is often unpredictable. Surprisingly, both were excited when they heard the news. Bonnie immediately began talking excitedly about what she wanted to do and the Instagram videos she would make. I was relieved that everyone seemed thrilled, and I felt happy to be able to do something nice for my family. But that moment of happiness soon turned sour when Bonnie insisted on planning the vacation. I told her that since I was paying for the trip, I wanted to plan everything myself. She made a fuss, claiming I wasn't good at planning and that I should hand the responsibility over to her. It wasn't a request, it was a demand that I delegate everything to her. There were several reasons I wanted to do the planning myself. First, it was my gift. Second, I know how extravagant Bonnie can be when someone else is footing the bill. She tends to reserve the most expensive things without thinking twice. I had booked everything according to my budget. My parents tried to mediate, suggesting that if I were too busy, I could ask Bonnie for help with planning the activities. I told everyone that the activities would be a surprise to keep the excitement alive. Bonnie, however, insisted on knowing the details in advance so she could shop for appropriate outfits for each activity. I assured her it wasn't necessary, but she continued to press. Exhausted by her attempts to control the situation, I gave her the itinerary to get her off my back. Immediately, she called me, furious, pointing out things that needed to be changed to make everyone comfortable. Her suggestions seemed reasonable, so I adjusted the schedule accordingly. That only fed her ego. She said something like, "That's why I wanted to plan it, attention to detail." I knew then that if anything went wrong with the trip, Bonnie would be quick to criticize. So, I accessed my account and made it clear to her that she could reschedule activities only with my approval. She agreed, but then she went to our family group chat and announced that she had taken over the trip planning and had made some changes. Some of her additions were actually nice, like wearing matching outfits every day, which was fun at first. But a week before the trip, I discovered she had canceled some of the activities I had booked and replaced them with her preferences. She also mentioned that she had made executive decisions regarding the itinerary and that everyone should follow her leadership. I was furious. This was supposed to be my gift, but she had completely taken over. I called her, trying to reason with her, but she was adamant. She said that since she was better at planning, I should let her take charge. I firmly told her there was no way I would allow that, as she had already done enough to sabotage my plans. She accused me of being controlling and hung up. Later that night, my parents called me. Bonnie had told them everything, and they wanted to know what was going on. I explained the situation without going into too much detail, hoping to keep the trip a surprise for them. To my surprise, they sided with Bonnie. They said that since she was so excited about the trip, I should let her have some control. They didn't seem to understand that she had completely taken over and dismissed all my efforts and expenses. They told me it didn't matter who planned the trip. The important thing was that we were family and would have a good time together in Hawaii. I felt frustrated and unappreciated. In a moment of anger, I considered canceling the whole trip, but I calmed down. I didn't cancel the trip, but I stopped participating in the planning. I figured if Bonnie wanted to be in charge so badly, she could have it. I would just sit back and try to enjoy the vacation, even if it wasn't what I had imagined. However, things took a turn for the worse 2 days ago. As we were preparing to leave tomorrow, I received a notification that my tickets had been successfully canceled. Confused and angry, I immediately called the travel agency and found out that the tickets had been canceled from my account. No surprise, it was Bonnie. I called her in a rage, demanding an explanation. She acted as if nothing was wrong, laughing and saying, "Oh yes, I did that. Isn't it funny?" I lost my composure and screamed at her. She replied, "Okay, I hate to say this, but even though you paid for everything and blah blah blah, we can't have you on the trip. You're too controlling, and your negative attitude would ruin the vacation for everyone. I've discussed it with everyone, and the family has agreed to leave you out. You're not worth ruining our trip." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The trip I had paid for and planned was now happening without me. Somehow, my sister had convinced everyone that I was the problem, and they had all agreed to move forward without me. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let her trample over me anymore. I logged into my account, canceled her ticket, and rebooked it in my name. I then changed the account password so she couldn't access it or make any more changes to the travel itinerary. Afterward, I sent a message to the family group chat, explaining how Bonnie had decided I wasn't welcome on the trip I had paid for. I told them that I had canceled her ticket, and if anyone else wanted to stay with her, I'd be happy to cancel their tickets as well. The reaction was immediate. My brother called me right away, saying he had no idea about Bonnie's plans. I told him about the argument I'd had with her, and he confirmed that she had been making things up. He assured me that he never agreed to exclude me, and I was pretty sure our parents wouldn't either, especially since I was paying for the trip. It was a relief to know at least he wasn't on her side. While I was still talking to him, my parents called, furious that I had canceled Bonnie's ticket. They accused me of being mean and vindictive, but I stood my ground. I explained that I had planned and paid for the trip as a gift for the family, and if they didn't want me there, then I'd rather take a solo trip. I wasn't going to sacrifice myself and let this be taken away from me. They confirmed that Bonnie had never been asked to cancel my tickets, but they were also upset that I had canceled hers. They wanted all of us to go on the trip together. I told them I wasn't going to let Bonnie dictate the terms of the trip I had organized. Of course, Bonnie was livid. She sent me a barrage of angry messages, calling me all sorts of names. I forwarded the messages to my parents to show them what their daughter was really doing. Later, my dad called me, offering to mediate between us. He said he'd bring Bonnie into the call, and she'd apologize so I could rebook her ticket, and we could all go on the vacation together. Although I wanted to resist, I knew Bonnie would never apologize, so I agreed to the call. Dad added Bonnie to the conversation, but she was too angry to realize it was a conference call. He told her she had acted badly by canceling my tickets and that she needed to apologize. Without hesitating, she responded, "I'm not apologizing because I did the right thing." Then, she said, "Apologize to that idiot? No way." Dad immediately hung up the call. I called him again and asked, "Now do you see how cruel your daughter is? Or do you still want me to take her back?" He remained silent, saying only that he felt divided between his two children. I knew I'd done the right thing, but it was hard. The trip wouldn't be the same after all this conflict. This wasn't what I had envisioned. I wanted it to be a family trip, and even though Bonnie and I had our issues, she was still part of the family. My brother and I wouldn't be as affected, but I knew my parents would be upset by her absence. Update. Things worsened between Bonnie and me after she was excluded from the trip. She tried to turn my brother against me, suggesting they take the trip together without me. He laughed at her and asked if she had enough money to cover 50% of the travel expenses. She admitted she didn't, but promised to pay him back later. My brother just shook his head. Both of us knew she'd never pay him back. She doesn't have a stable job and often skips work whenever she's in a bad mood. Bonnie then suggested they go to Mexico instead of Hawaii. My brother burst out laughing, declining her offer to be her vacation photographer for free. Afterward, she resorted to emotionally manipulating my parents, trying to convince them to side with her. But this time, they stood firm, telling her she had to apologize if she wanted to join us. My parents tried to convince me to be the bigger person and forgive Bonnie, but they eventually accepted that she wouldn't be joining us. As I boarded the plane, there was tension, and I could see the disappointment in my parents' eyes. When we arrived in Hawaii, I took control of the planning and ensured we enjoyed the trip to the fullest. We did a private luau, snow adventures, and even a helicopter tour of the island. Despite the initial discomfort, we began to relax and have fun. Gradually, my parents accepted that this was still a family vacation, even without Bonnie. Throughout the week, Bonnie sent sporadic messages filled with anger and accusations. Over time, even my parents started to see her behavior as problematic. We returned from Hawaii with amazing memories, and the tension had mostly dissipated. Though my parents were still disappointed that Bonnie wasn't there, they appreciated the effort I had put into making the trip memorable. After we returned, Bonnie blocked me on social media. She was furious with our parents for choosing me over her, and even expressed a desire to cut them off. However, she couldn't since she still lived in their home. She also called my brother a profiteer for supporting me and claimed she never wanted to see me again. It hurt, but I knew I had done what I needed to do. I don't regret defending myself and setting boundaries, though I wish things had turned out differently. Maybe someday Bonnie will realize she was in the wrong, and we can repair our relationship. Until then, I'll hold on to the memories of that incredible trip. Final update. Things got even worse. After we returned from the trip, I went back to work and had to put in overtime to catch up. I didn't talk much to my parents about Bonnie, but I knew she was probably throwing tantrums about them enjoying the vacation without her. To make things worse for her, my brother and I flooded social media with family photos from the trip. It was quite amusing. Almost 3 months later, I visited my parents and noticed Bonnie's room was empty. When I asked about her, they told me they had finally asked her to move out. While it wasn't exactly eviction, they had made it clear she needed to take her life and career more seriously. Since she had no rent or food responsibilities at home, she hadn't been motivated to work or plan for her future. A year ago, they had started charging her rent to stay in their home. Initially, Bonnie became enraged and called my parents greedy when Dad threatened to evict her. She reluctantly agreed to pay the rent, but over the course of a year, she only managed to pay for 3 months. Each month, she found a new excuse for not making the payments. After my parents returned from a trip, she exploded in anger. They tried to calm her down, even bringing her gifts, but she threw them back in their faces. In the end, Dad had had enough of her superior attitude and told her to pack her bags. He was going to drop her off somewhere. Her behavior changed immediately. She began sobbing, hugged Mom, and said she acted that way because she missed them and was hurt that we left her out of the trip. Mom replied that Bonnie had brought this on herself, that it was her narcissistic behavior that led to the exclusion. Despite her fake tears and promises to pay rent regularly, my parents had given her enough chances, and she remained the same manipulative person. This time, they didn't give in. They made her leave the house, though Dad found her a small apartment and even paid for the first 2 months of rent. While I didn't like that everything came to her so easily, it was better than letting her continue living at home for free. Although my parents were still concerned about her, they knew that making her more self-sufficient was the right move. What they didn't realize was that Bonnie was a tough nut to crack. A week ago, Mom called to give me an update on Bonnie. Dad had covered 2 months of rent for her, and as they left, Mom gave her some ready-to-eat meals and snacks that lasted about a week. After that, Bonnie started showing up at my parents' house, staying until dinner. Mom would offer her food, and eventually, Bonnie even began sleeping over occasionally. At first, they tolerated it, thinking she was just homesick, but over time, they realized something was off. They confronted her, and Bonnie confessed that she had stopped paying rent. She was hiding from the fact that she hadn't paid a single month's rent with her own money. The apartment was all covered by Dad. When Mom asked her what she had done with her salary, Bonnie admitted that she had spent it on new shoes for work. Mom, always trying to help, offered to lend her money to cover the rent, but Bonnie refused, insisting she wanted to move back home. Mom asked Dad to intervene, and this time he was firm. He told Bonnie that there would be no more help and that if she asked for assistance again, their door would not be opened. I thought Dad's response was harsh, but I understood his frustration. They had done more than enough for Bonnie, and it was time for her to stand on her own. Bonnie tried to get my brother involved, saying she couldn't ask me for help because it would boost my ego and make her feel like a loser. My brother refused to lend her money, and she even asked him to borrow money from me and then lend it to her. My brother shut her down, telling her that if she needed money, she should ask me herself. Bonnie, furious, called him my bootlicker and accused him of running after me for a free meal. It was absurd. While I took my brother's recount of events with caution, it was clear that Bonnie's behavior had reached its peak. I'm glad I was the first one to stand up to her by excluding her from the trip. I remember how my parents initially tried to twist the situation to include her, but now they finally realized how toxic she had become. She used her role as their daughter to manipulate them, but they had had enough. The last time I saw Bonnie was unexpected. One extremely tiring Thursday, I arrived home from work to find her standing at my door. It was a cold, rainy day, and she looked miserable. I didn't know how long she had been standing there, but I didn't know what to say when I saw her. She greeted me with a dubious hello and tried to hug me, asking how I had been. I just stood there, holding my things, as she embraced me. Once I managed to shake her off, I opened the door, mostly because I didn't want to stand in the rain anymore. She pushed her way inside without waiting for me to invite her in. After putting my coat and things away, I asked her what she wanted. She said we hadn't seen each other in a while and that she just wanted to stop by. I wasn't buying it and told her to cut the act and tell me what she really wanted. That's when she made her usual sad face, the one she used on our parents, and told me she had nowhere to live. She claimed she had been evicted after being a few weeks late on rent, but I knew she was lying. My mother had already told me she hadn't paid rent for several months. I told her no. Her next move was to pressure me to talk to our parents or my brother to get them to help her. She said I was a bad brother and, at the very least, should find it in my heart to help her avoid ending up on the street. I refused to help her, saying if she wanted any chance at repairing her relationship with our parents, she needed to improve her life and show some responsibility. That's when her mood shifted. She accused me of thinking I was superior because I had money and a good job. She said the only reason the family loved me was because I paid for things like the trip to Hawaii, even though that was the only thing I'd ever paid for them. At that point, I had heard enough. I told her it was time for her to leave, and if she didn't, I would make her leave by whatever means necessary. Needless to say, she didn't like the ultimatum, but she finally left. Afterward, I blocked her everywhere. I hadn't needed to before, as she never tried to contact me after the trip, but I didn't want to take any risks going forward. I don't know where she's staying now or what she's doing, and frankly, I don't care. She hasn't even spoken to my parents. I hope this is the last update, or at least the next one will be about her getting her life back together. Final update. As many have asked for updates on where Bonnie is living, I've returned after 10 days to tell you what I know. After visiting me that night, she went to my brother's house. She tried the same tactics, but he didn't let her in either. From what I've heard from my mother, Bonnie is now living with a friend or coworker. I don't know the specifics of their arrangement, but I feel sorry for her friend. It can't be easy living with someone like Bonnie. I only updated because people asked, but I don't really care much about what happens to her at this point. Hopefully, this is my last update. Thank you very much for watching to the story so far. I suggest you to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss tomorrow's stories.